All right. So you written this book with Ashton Ellis, and it is a two-part book. I mean, there's a part that goes through the fundamentals, the philosophy behind it all, and then there's more sort of the activist part, of the
applied part. How do you do it?
Right. Let's talk about we have been talking about the philosophy part now.
And why have we been doing it? Because it's important
Indeed.
to explain to people and for them to be really clear that society is a voluntary process. It cannot be coercive. If it's coercive, it will ultimately deteriorate into a dictatorship, or it will ultimately collapse into chaos, into anarchy. So it is a voluntary process. That's the theory, but it's also the way we live our lives in relation to other people. Now, how do you make the society a society which restores personal liberties, which restores voluntarism, and we are the most generous people on the planet. We give generously to charities. We volunteer our time. One of the puzzles we had was when 9/11 occurred and we were attacked, Americans couldn't understand, why do they hate us? We're wonderful people. Well, one of the problems, as you know, is only 17% of Americans have passports, so they think everything else is all the same everywhere else in the world. No, it's not the same everywhere else in the world. North Korea is not the same as here. There are other societies where women have no rights at all. Now, people who are so-called progressives in this country ought to be standing up for the rights of those women, and they're not. Why? Because it's politically, well, you know, we shouldn't really share our values. After all, maybe it's okay in other societies for women to be beaten or hung or shot or treated as second-class citizens, and we don't want to interfere. Okay, I'm not saying we should interfere. But what I'm saying is that there's this mindset of outrage that somehow gets switched off and on. Liberties and freedom and individual rights apply to us. But then in the rest of the world, it's all the same, but it isn't all the same. Which is it? It's kind of one or the other. And we are confused because we don't travel a lot. Why would we have to travel to visit a mountain or a seashore or a desert? We have them all in this country. So, you know, the old joke, an American goes to some exotic place for vacation where he wants to see a different country, a different culture, a different society, a different currency. He goes to Canada for vacation. Or if she really wants to have an experience exciting, she'll go to Mexico. So the implied side of the book is incredibly important as well, and is how do you take back America? How do you convince your fellow Americans, especially the progressives? Progressivism is a form it's almost a disease. It's a true believer. Famous person, Eric Hoffer, years ago wrote a book called The True Believer. You wind up disregarding logic. You wind up disregarding your own feelings, your own relationships with your own family to sign on to some ism. Now, when George Bush was in charge of the presidency, we had, for most of his administration, the Republicans dominating both houses as well as the presidency. And there were a lot of things done that a lot of people were unhappy with. A lot of things done people were happy with. But the problem was there weren't any checks and balances operating the way the Founding Fathers envisioned it. And so people wanted change. So somebody steps up to the plate and says, I'll give you change.
Right.
And he was being quite honest. It wasn't the change that people wanted, but it was at least not the same thing that was going on. Now we discover that Obama's change was to transition us into socialism, into a form of progressivism is a form of socialism that takes place over a long period of time. And socialism is basically a concept not only where the government owns the means of production. Gosh, what have we done in the past few years? Let's see. We've taken over General Motors. The government owns Chrysler. The government owns AIG. The government owns Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. The government makes 95% of all the home loans now. So that's by definition the means of production of socialist. But more importantly, there's the psychology that the government is good and free enterprise, private enterprise, individual people working in small businesses is somehow bad. And, of course, Ronald Reagan had a classic phrase about that. He said, the worst lie you can ever tell is I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. It doesn't work that way. There are always prices to be paid. I'll give you this, quote, quote, by giving it to you because I'm taking the money out of other people's pockets. And they don't have any rights about that because it's a form of involuntary theft. And I'm going to, in turn, buy your votes, and I'll get reelected by giving you these things. It's a marvelous way. You have two different groups vying for these entitlements, for the votes. Eventually, it corrupts the entire process. So people recognize that. They recognize it. All people recognize that. And the challenge is, how do we fix the system a little bit, but also how do we get our fellow citizens to think about freedom as a personal responsibility, not something that the government, quote, gives you.
Right, and you stress that in the book. It's an overall theme of the book about personal responsibility, of course. You have here really a manual for how to go about to spread liberty and to spread these ideas.
Right.
And I mean, we could go into the details here, but what you have is very sort of practical things. And that's, I mean, it's about action, right? You have to step up from your chair and do something.
That's right. After the first part where we talk about essentially the principles of freedom and liberty, in the second part we talk about the 15 core issues, the hot buttons, what the progressives say, and then what the classical liberals say, because what we really are is classical liberals. And the rest of the word, if you call yourself liberal, that's what the Founding Fathers were, liberal. The progressives hijacked the word liberal about 60 years ago in the United States. So liberal doesn't mean in the United States what it means in Europe, for example. So we use the word classical liberal, which means the sense of the individual, the freedoms, the responsibilities, the rights that individuals have to create a society which is a voluntary society, a generous society, a loving society. Not a coercive society, not a society where people have a sense of being an underclass. One of the problems is that we've been fighting, for example, the war on poverty for 60 years, 50 years, and poverty is worse now than it was 50 years ago. And we spent hundreds of billions of dollars. Something is wrong. Obviously, you know, one of the jokes is the sense of craziness. To be crazy is to do the same thing over and over and over and still fail at it and not learn that you're doing the wrong thing. Well, we've been spending 50, 60 years in fighting the war on poverty completely the wrong way, and now we've made poverty worse and worse and worse, until eventually everybody will be poor in the country. There'll be a few rich people, mostly people in Congress. You know how many millionaires are in Congress? I mean, it goes on and on, hundreds of millions of dollars, people who are millionaires. So we have a how-to process. We deal with 15 different issues. We talk about them, how to answer the questions of progressives. But then we go on and we talk about how can an individual be an activist? What kinds of specific things, that's kind of our toolkit section, can you do to make effective change immediately? And then we provide a section also, for example, on resources, other resources you can go to plug in. And we have a great website that goes with the book. If you buy the book, it gives you a secret number at the back of the book. You key it into our website, refoundingamericabook.com, and then it unlocks a brand new insider section of the book that gives you all kinds of additional goodies and material information.
Oh, great, great.
So here's, you wanted an example of something to do as an activist right now. Okay. Mainstream media voted 92%. Let's take, for example, the people who are in the White House press pool. 92% of them voted Democrat in the last cycle. Less than 8% of them voted Republican, because some people voted Libertarian, Peace and Freedom, Constitution Party, etc. So, needless to say, there is a mindset, there is a progressive mindset, and the progressives have hijacked the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party today is not the Democratic Party of 30 years ago, the Democratic Party of my grandparents. I started out as a Democrat. I was in love with the Democratic Party, and I worked to try to elect Kennedys. And Kennedy wouldn't be today, I think, a member of the Democratic Party. He believed in cutting taxes. He believed in personal responsibilities. He believed in entrepreneurship. He believed in the strong national defense, all the things that progressives kind of twitch about. So,